How are tuition costs factored into a child support obligation? Hi, I'm Alicia Kinchlow, a family law attorney based out of the Philadelphia area and the owner of Kinchlow Law. So yesterday I talked to you guys about income tax returns and how they're factored into child support obligations, and the video just before that was about child care expenses. Today we're going to talk about tuition, which is different than child care expenses because we're talking about actual tuition for K through 12, okay? So tuition costs are interesting because they're not something that has to be guaranteed to be put into a child support obligation. So if you watch the child care expenses video, you heard me talk about that child care expenses are not always included if the parent is not working. So that can actually be a factor that is used to consider as to whether or not the child care expenses are to be included in there. There's an additional step when it comes to tuition and private school. So because we know that children have the ability to go to a public school for K through 12th grade in most counties in Pennsylvania, depending on their age, then we know that basically every child has a right to a public education. The issue becomes where parents want to put their children into other schools, whether it's a charter school or whether it's a private school, whether it's a Catholic school. So then we know with those type of situations can come tuition costs. And the issue that we look for in determining whether or not tuition is included in a child support obligation is whether there has been a meeting of the minds between both parties. Now, again, as you guys have heard me say throughout the videos, you always want to consult with an attorney about the facts specific to your case because these videos are not legal advice. They're for educational purposes. And so what you can do is take some of this information back to your attorney and talk to them about whether or not your situation fits this case. But it's very important to note that what the court may look for in determining a support obligation when it comes to tuition, again, is whether or not both parties agree to it. So one person or one party unilaterally, so without the permission of the other person, puts a child into a private school and that other party objects to it, then the court may say that that person does not have to be responsible for any of that tuition. So it's very important to make sure that there is a meeting of the minds when it comes to that. Now, there has been some question about in situations where maybe one parent has sole legal custody. So sole legal custody gives that parent the right to make decisions about major issues like religion, like education, like medical issues. And so the question becomes where a parent has the authority to make the legal decisions regarding education, can the other party then be put on the hook for tuition if they have the ability to make payments for the tuition? I've seen cases where the master has said no. And I think what often happens is whether or not it stays at that level or the person moves it to the next level and files exceptions, which I explained in another video is kind of like an appeal within the same court of common pleas, or whether they file an additional appeal to Superior Court outside of family court. Sometimes because people are not aware of their rights, which is why we do some of these videos, they never seek to push it past that issue, or they don't say the right things or make the right arguments during their hearings to not be put on the hook for a tuition cost they don't agree with. Now, simply saying that you don't agree with it may not get you out of it either. So you want to be very careful, and that's why we always say you want to speak to an attorney about the facts specific to your case, because there are nuances in the law. There's case law that develops all the time. So you want to make sure that you're operating under the right strategy for your particular case. Now, let's say that the master will say that, yes, tuition is going to be considered part of the child support obligation. There's a couple of ways this can be done. It's kind of similar to child care costs that we talked about in the other video. That is, basically, the court can determine how much each party is going to be responsible for paying, usually after looking at whatever deductions are going to come from any types of grants or scholarships that the family might be entitled to. One thing to think about, if I don't mention this at the end, I'm going to mention it now, is that you want to look at the fact that tuition can change year over year. So it may not be the same amount every year. So that is something to consider when you have a party having that child support obligation included in the actual monthly or biweekly child support payments, or if it's something that is going to be split between the parties but not actually included in the child support obligation, but the parties are going to be directed to pay their portions directly to the school, to the institution. So that's something that needs to be considered too. Do you want to have the tuition cost included inside of the child support obligation? There may be reasons why that's the best way to go about it. Maybe the other person is extremely unreasonable. Maybe there's high conflict between the parties. And you need to make sure that this payment is allotted for each time, because you don't want to put the child education at jeopardy. But if you do have a fairly responsible other party, the way to go may be for the parties to pay it directly to the school so they know how much they're paying. And then when you have those increases, it can be accounted for without having to come back to court and do a modification. So again, so sometimes it may be done based on some type of other formula on who's going to pay what amount of tuition, and it may be split like childcare costs generally are, based on the amount of income each party has. So let's say there's 100% of a pot of the total monthly income. One person makes up 60% of that pot, the other makes up 40%. The tuition cost may be split along the same lines. One person is responsible for 60%, other person is responsible for 40%. And again, that's going to get added on top of whatever the child support obligation is. You also want to think about what's going to happen with maybe meals, books, other things like that that are may not be included in the actual tuition amount, but are actually separate costs on top of the tuition. How are those things going to be how those things can be adjusted, or how they're going to be accounted for when you're doing your child support obligation, or even deciding these things outside of court. All right, so I hope this shed a little bit of light on tuition charges and how they may be included or not included in a child support obligation. And you've already heard me say this twice. I'm going to say it a third time. You want to speak to an attorney licensed in your area about the facts specific to your case, especially when it comes to things like this. If you want to speak to an attorney from my firm, you can reach us at kinshlowlaw.com. You can request a consultation there. I also put our number in the show notes. Please leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about this video, and let me know if there's other topics you would like us to cover. These videos are here for you guys. This is something that we do for the community to make sure that we're sharing information about how family law, specifically divorce, custody, and support, typically works in most situations in the state of Pennsylvania. All right, until next time, take care.